Hello and welcome to Voices Against Abuse. I'm Sarah and I'm here again with Bridget Carter. Today we're exploring an issue that ties into so much of what we've been discussing: coercion, undue influence, and how those in positions of authority don't always recognise it.
That's right, Sarah. This time we're looking at the Garry Vernon case, particularly the judge's comments on why he didn't consider it grooming, despite the victim's family believing it was. And from there, we'll be linking this into the bigger issue of coercion, including what I've been pushing for with the assisted dying bill.
So let's start with the case. In Garry Vernon's trial, I'm right in thinking we had a victim's family saying that there was grooming, but the judge didn't see it that way. Can you explain this to me?
Sure. So this case involved Garry Vernon, a 54-year-old resident of the Isle of Man. He was convicted of stealing nearly £1 million from his wife's elderly grandfather, Evan Gelling-Farger, between 2010 and 2013. Vernon exploited his position within the family to gain Mr. Farger's trust, persuading him to transfer substantial sums of money under the guise of investing in foreign exchange markets. Instead, though, Vernon used these funds to fuel his gambling addiction, resulting in significant financial losses. In April 2023, he was sentenced to 9 years in prison for those actions. The victim's family argued that his behaviour amounted to grooming, meaning a long-term, calculated effort to gain control and influence over the victim. But the judge ruled that it wasn't grooming. Instead, they framed it as something less deliberate, maybe even mutual.
That's so shocking. So why do you think that the judge dismissed it as grooming?
I think a lot of it's down to how grooming and coercion are misunderstood in the legal settings. Judges, like doctors, are not always trained to recognise coercion. They work within a legal framework that often requires clear-cut evidence of force or direct manipulation, but grooming is psychological and coercion is often subtle, long-term and embedded in relationships. So what the judge may have been looking for was a stereotypical image of grooming where someone is obviously vulnerable and controlled from the outset, but in reality coercion happens in layers. It's not always so obvious.
So this makes me think, do we actually just assume that the judges always understand coercion?
Absolutely, and that assumption is dangerous. Judges work with legal definitions and they don't always have specialist training in psychological manipulation. So take financial abuse cases. Time and time again we see families say this was coercion, yet courts struggle to prove it. Look at the Whittle v. Whittle case. It's a case where an elderly person was manipulated into changing their will. The legal process focused on whether they had the mental capacity, but coercion is more than that. It's psychological conditioning over time.
So if a judge can miss coercions in simple cases like this that are quite obvious, what does that mean to other situations like assisted dying?
So that's exactly the issue I raise with ministers. If a judge, someone with how many years of legal expertise, can't always spot coercion, how can we assume a doctor will? Assisted dying involves huge vulnerabilities like financial abuse or grooming cases, and yet there's an assumption that if a doctor assesses someone as having capacity, then coercion isn't a factor, but we know from history that that isn't true.
And that's what we're pushing for, right? More training, independent oversight, and stronger safeguards.
100%. The same way we need judges to be trained in recognising coercion, we need doctors, social workers, legal professionals trained to see the red flags before it's too late. Otherwise, we end up in situations where coercion is happening right in front of people. And because it's not happening in an obvious, forceful way, it gets dismissed.
So we can take away from this that coercion isn't always obvious. If we don't start talking about it seriously across all areas, from abuse cases to assisted dying laws, we will continue to fail those that are most vulnerable. What we need to actually do is train the professionals so they can actually understand coercion, multidisciplinary teams in legal and medical decisions, and independent scrutiny, because one person's judgment is not enough when coercion is involved.
That's such an important point, Sarah.
Thanks, Bridge, for sharing this, and to anyone listening, let's keep this discussion going. If you've got thoughts or experience, we'd love to hear from you.
Absolutely. These issues won't change unless we push for better protections. So thanks for listening to Voices Against Abuse.
Take care, and we'll see you next time.